in the high country of the Southwest, where the mesas touch the sky like ancient prayers reaching toward the heavens, where the earth remembers every footstep, every hardship, every sacrifice ever made upon its sacred surface, there lived an elderly Navajo woman. Her name was White Feather. She had lived 73 winters. Her life had been long, but it had not been easy. The Southwest does not grant ease to anyone. It demands respect. It demands endurance. It demands that you understand, in your very bones, that survival is not a gift. It is a daily negotiation with forces much larger than yourself. White Feather lived alone in a small home she had built with her own hands, alongside her late husband, may his spirit walk in beauty, many years before. The home was made of stone and adobe, constructed in the traditional way. The walls were thick, designed to hold warmth in winter and coolness in summer. The roof was wooden beams covered with earth and clay, sturdy and dependable, like the woman herself. Outside, she tended a garden, not a large one. The soil was unforgiving, rocky, resistant to cultivation. But through decades of work, through trial and error, through learning from her mother and her mother's mother, she had coaxed that earth into productivity. Corn grew there, beans, squash, the sacred plants that had sustained her people since time immemorial. She kept sheep too, 7 of them, not many but enough. They provided wool for weaving and occasionally, when necessary, meat. She had learned to be a good steward of these animals, to understand their nature, to work with them rather than against them. By the time she had reached her 73rd year, White Feather had learned the mathematics of survival in this harsh land. She knew how much corn she needed to store for winter. She knew how many squash to dry and hang in her storage room. She knew the ratios, the calculations, the careful accounting that meant the difference between comfort in winter and desperate hunger. She had learned these lessons through necessity, through loss, through watching her people suffer during lean years, when drought came, when the summer rains failed, when the earth seemed to hold back its bounty out of pure indifference. Her hands were weathered, the hands of someone who had worked the earth most of her life. They were strong hands, capable hands, but also hands marked by time. Her fingers were gnarled slightly with age. Her palms were calloused. Her nails were stained with soil that no amount of washing could completely remove. Her face was lined, deeply lined. The lines told stories. Stories of sun and wind. Stories of laughter shared with her husband around evening fires. Stories of grief when her children had died in their youth. Stories of resilience, of dignity maintained despite hardship, of faith in something larger than individual suffering. Her eyes were dark, keen, and luminous. They missed nothing. They had seen much, and in them burned a kind of quiet determination, the determination of someone who had decided long ago that she would endure, that she would survive, that she would maintain her connection to the sacred traditions of her people no matter what the world threw at her. But late autumn came that year, and with it came desperation across the entire region. The summer had been brutal. The rains had failed. The grass had withered in the heat. The game animals, sensing the drought, had moved away to find water and vegetation. The hunters had gone out, but their arrows came back empty. The traps remained unsprung. The earth, which had always provided, seemed suddenly stingy, almost punishing. For weeks, the hunting parties had ranged farther and farther from home, desperate to find anything, deer, elk, rabbits, anything that could sustain the people through the coming winter. But the land, parched and exhausted, had little to offer. Hunger began to creep through the villages and scattered settlements like a cold wind. Hunger that gnawed at the belly. Hunger that made thinking difficult. Hunger that transformed strong. Sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. They came to White Feather's home. 15 men. She heard them before she saw them. The sound of their footsteps was irregular, uneven. Not the purposeful stride of men on a mission, but the shuffle of those moving through sheer will alone, through determination to take one more step, and then another, with no guarantee that the legs would obey. White Feather was outside, tending to her sheep. She stood and turned toward the sound, and as they came into view, her breath caught in her throat. 15 men, but they were gaunt, skeletal. She could see the bones of their shoulders outlined beneath their shirts. Their cheeks were hollow, drawn so deeply inward that their faces had become almost skull-like. Their eyes had that particular glassiness that comes with prolonged hunger, as if they were looking at the world through a kind of fog, as if they were already halfway to another realm. Some were older men, warriors she recognized from nearby settlements. Some were younger, barely old enough to be considered men at all, boys really, with just the first growth of facial hair, trying desperately to maintain the dignity and bearing of warriors even as their bodies betrayed them through weakness. All of them were moving slowly. Each step seemed to cost them something precious. She could see it in their posture, in the way they held themselves. Each step was a negotiation between will and body, and from the looks of them, the body was winning. They had not come to take. There was no threat in their bearing. They had come because they had nowhere else to go. They had come because they were desperate, because they were starving, because the hunting had failed and their reserves were gone, and they faced the prospect of dying in the wilderness far from home. They had come because, in their desperation, they remembered White Feather. They remembered an old woman who had a reputation for always having food, always having something to give. Whether that reputation was completely accurate or simply the exaggerated hope of desperate men, they had come anyway, knowing that refusal was almost certain, but hoping against hope. White Feather looked at them. She did not hesitate. She did not stand there calculating, measuring what little she had against 15 mouths to feed. She did not think about her own winter, about the provisions she had so carefully gathered and stored. She simply looked at these men. She gestured for them to come inside. Desperate men, she said, and she made a decision. Her voice was not loud, but it carried authority. The authority of someone who knew what needed to be done and was going to do it, regardless of the cost. The men hesitated. Perhaps they were too weak to move quickly. Perhaps they could not believe their good fortune. Perhaps they were afraid that any sudden movement might shatter this moment, might cause the old woman to change her mind. But they came. She brought them water first. Cool water, drawn from the well that stood beside her home. She carried it in clay vessels that had been made by her mother's mother, vessels that had held water through decades, vessels as enduring and practical as White Feather herself. One by one, she brought the water to the men. Some drank slowly, carefully, as if they were afraid their bodies would reject the liquid. Others drank desperately, gulping, pouring the water down their throats like men drowning in air, trying to pull liquid from the sky. As they drank, she could see the small transformations, color returning slightly to their faces, eyes becoming a bit more focused, bodies seeming to regain just a fraction of their strength and solidity. Then she began to cook. She moved into her home, and the men settled outside, sitting or lying on the ground, too weak to stand for long. White Feather had not asked them their names. She had not asked where they were from or what had happened to them. She simply saw the need and responded to it. All through that day, she worked. She brought out her stores of corn, precious corn that she had gathered in the autumn, that she had dried and ground, that she had been saving for her own winter meals. She began to boil it, to create a thick, nourishing corn soup. She added beans, more of her carefully preserved stores. She roasted squash that she had been keeping in her storage room, vegetables that were meant to sustain her through the cold months ahead. As evening fell, she began to bring out the food. The smell of it filled the air around her small home. The smell of nourishment, the smell of hope, the smell of something warm and real and sustaining. The men ate. They ate slowly at first, as if their bodies had forgotten how to process food, as if their stomachs had contracted so much that they could only accept small amounts. But as their bodies adjusted, they ate more. They ate with a kind of desperate gratitude that is only possible for those who have known true hunger. And as they ate, some of them wept. Tears ran down their faces. They tried to hide it, these proud warriors, but they could not. The tears came anyway. Tears of relief. Tears of gratitude. Tears born from the simple fact that someone had seen them in their desperation and had chosen to help them. White Feather did not speak much to them. She simply continued to work. She continued to feed them. Throughout the night, she kept the fire going. She kept the food coming. She gave them everything. All of her carefully hoarded supplies, all of her winter provisions, all of the things that represented her security and her survival. Around the fire, As the stars began to emerge in the night sky, one of the older warriors finally spoke. His voice was hoarse from disuse, from hunger, from the strain of survival. "Old woman," he said, "you are giving us everything you have. Your winter stores, your food. You will not survive the cold season." White Feather did not stop what she was doing. She continued to prepare more food, more broth, more of the things that were meant to sustain her through the months ahead. "A person who watches others starve while they have food is not a person," she said simply. "They are something else, something less. I will not be that something else. The earth provides. It always has. I have faith that it will provide again. But these men need this food more than I need my security. And so they will have it." And the warriors said nothing more. But they understood. They understood that they were witnessing something sacred. They understood that they were being given a gift that was worth more than the food itself. They were being given the gift of being remembered, of being seen, of mattering to someone. When morning came, the men were stronger. Not healed, not recovered, but stronger. They had eaten. They had rested. They had been cared for by hands that expected nothing in return. And as dawn broke over the valley, as the sun began its rise above the eastern mountains, the warriors prepared to leave. They gave White Feather their thanks. They promised her that her kindness would not be forgotten. They promised her that if she ever needed help, she had brothers who would come to her aid. Then they walked away, back toward their homes, back toward their people, carrying not just food in their bellies, but renewed hope in their hearts. But something extraordinary was happening across the region. The word spread. Somehow, through the mysterious ways that such news travels in close communities, the word got out. 15 men had gone searching for food and had not returned. 15 sons and brothers and friends had disappeared into the wilderness, and no one knew if they would come back alive or at all. And so the search began. Not just a casual search, a desperate, determined search. Warriors, fighters, men skilled in tracking and survival, men who were not going to rest until they had answers about what had happened to their brothers and sons and friends. The search parties spread out across the region. They moved through canyons and across mesas. They questioned people in scattered settlements. They followed trails that led toward the mountains where White Feather lived. And slowly, word came back. The 15 had been found. They were alive. They were with an old woman. They were safe. And so the warriors came, not in fear or anger, but in gratitude, in amazement, in the desire to witness what had happened, to understand how their brothers had been saved, to meet the woman who had given them life when death had seemed certain. Hundreds of them, hundreds of warriors filled the valley near White Feather's home. They came from villages across the region. They came with their weapons and their strength and their pride. They came because one of theirs had been saved, and that was a thing worthy of witnessing and honoring. And when they saw White Feather, an old woman, 73 winters old, standing alone in front of her small home, looking out at the hundreds of warriors before her, something shifted in the valley, something sacred. The warriors stood in silence. They understood immediately what had happened here. They understood that a woman with almost nothing had given every oldest warriors, that a woman alone whose own hair was gray, 15 men, whose own face was lined with decades of living, sacrifice, stepped forward. He walked slowly toward White Feather, and when he reached her, he took her weathered hands in his own weathered hands. "You have given us more than food," he said. "You have given us a reminder of who we are. You have given us proof that honor and compassion still live among our people. You have shown us that true strength is not the strength of the warrior in battle, but the strength of the spirit that chooses to give instead of take, that chooses to help instead of turn away, that chooses to see the sacred in the suffering of others." And White Feather, standing there surrounded by hundreds of warriors, said nothing, but in her dark, luminous eyes there was a light, the light of knowing that she had done the right thing, the light of knowing that her sacrifice had mattered, the light of knowing that she had honored the sacred traditions of her people, that she had, in the deepest sense, been a warrior herself. The warriors remained in the valley for 3 days. They brought food, deer and elk that they had managed to hunt, corn and beans and squash from their own stores. They brought materials to help repair White Feather's home. They brought gifts. They brought gratitude that was almost palpable in its intensity. And more than that, they brought something intangible. They brought the knowledge that White Feather would never be forgotten, that her name would be spoken with reverence in the communities around her, that her act of sacrifice and compassion would echo through the generations. Because what White Feather understood, and what the warriors came to understand, was a fundamental truth about humanity, about what it means to be human, what it means to be Navajo, what it means to live with integrity and honor and compassion in a world that is often cruel and unforgiving. True strength is not measured by the power to take. It is not measured by the ability to dominate or conquer. It is measured by the courage to give when you have little. It is measured by the grace to see another's suffering and respond with open hands and an open heart. It is measured by the willingness to sacrifice your own security for the sake of another's survival. White Feather did survive that winter. The warriors who had been saved by her compassion did not forget their promise. They hunted for her. They brought her food. They ensured that she would not go hungry. The earth, as she had faith it would, provided again. And the story of what happened in that valley, in that autumn when an old woman fed 15 starving men and was rewarded by the gratitude of hundreds, became a legend. It was told around fires as an example of what it means to live with honor. It was told to children as a lesson in compassion and courage. It was told to warriors as a reminder that true strength lives not in violence, but in the willingness to care for others. The valley remembers. The rocks remember. The earth remembers. And the spirit of White Feather, the spirit of a woman who gave everything, who asked for nothing, who saw the sacred in the suffering of others, that spirit continues to walk in beauty through the land, reminding all who have eyes to see that this is what it means to be truly alive. This is what it means to be human. This is what it means to honor the sacred traditions of a people. This is what it means to be a warrior of the spirit.